The dust cloud on the horizon had been growing for 3 days before Amelia Foster finally saw the rider emerge from the shimmering heat waves that rose off the Colorado plains. She stood on the porch of her modest ranch house outside Silverton, one hand shading her eyes against the brutal August sun of 1882, watching the solitary figure approach with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Men rarely came this far into the high country alone, unless they were running from something or towards something with equal desperation. Her father had been dead for 6 months now, claimed by pneumonia during the bitter winter, and in those months Amelia had learned that a woman alone on a cattle ranch attracted attention she neither wanted nor needed. She was 23 years old, and the neighboring ranchers had made it clear they expected her to fail, to sell out, to marry one of their sons or foremen and fold her land into their holdings. She had refused every offer, every proposal, every suggestion that she could not manage alone. The rider was still a quarter-mile away when Amelia went back inside and retrieved her father's Winchester from above the mantel. She did not load it, did not even check if it was loaded, but she wanted it visible. She returned to the porch and sat in the rocking chair her father had built, the rifle across her lap, and waited. The horse that finally stopped at her fence line was a magnificent bay gelding, foam-flecked and exhausted. The man who dismounted moved like someone who had been in the saddle far too long, his movements stiff and careful. He was tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days of beard growth shadowing his jaw. His clothes were covered in trail dust, and even from 20 feet away, Amelia could see the weariness etched into every line of his body. He removed his hat and held it against his chest in a gesture that seemed both polite and oddly formal. "Miss Amelia Foster." The sound of her name on his lips made her grip the rifle tighter. "Who is asking? My name is Aaron Bennett. I have traveled from Texas to speak with you." "Texas?" Amelia did not move from her chair. "That is more than 1,000 miles, 1,043 by my best reckoning." His voice was rough, probably from days of breathing dust, but there was something in it that made her listen despite herself. "I know I have no right to come here unannounced. I know this must seem strange, but I made a promise to someone and I aim to keep it." "What promise would bring you 1,000 miles to my door?" Aaron Bennett looked down at his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. When he looked back up at her, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was not threat or anger, but a profound sadness mixed with determination. "Your brother, Thomas Foster, he was my friend." The name struck Amelia like a physical blow. She had not heard anyone speak Thomas's name in 2 years, not since the Army had sent his personal effects home with a brief letter explaining that Private Thomas Foster had died of wounds received in action against hostile Apache forces in Arizona Territory. He had been 19 years old. Thomas never mentioned anyone named Aaron Bennett in his letters. No, he would not have. "We met after his last letter home. I was a civilian scout attached to his unit." Aaron's knuckles were white where he gripped his hat. "I was with him when he died, Miss Foster. I held his hand and I listened to his last words, and I promised him something I have spent 2 years trying to fulfill." Amelia stood up slowly, the rifle still in her hands but no longer pointed even remotely in his direction. "What did you promise him?" "That I would make sure you were all right, that I would check on you and your father, make certain you were safe and provided for. Thomas talked about you constantly, Miss Foster, about how you were the only family he had left after your mother passed, about how your father was getting older and the ranch was getting harder to manage. He worried about you every single day. Thomas died 2 years ago. Why are you only coming now?" Aaron's jaw tightened. Because it took me 2 years to get free of my obligations and save enough money to make the journey. Because I was wounded in the same fight that killed Thomas and spent 4 months recovering. Because I went back to Texas first to set my own affairs in order, and because I am a man who keeps his promises even when they take time to fulfill. The honesty in his voice was undeniable. Amelia felt something inside her chest crack open, some wall she had built around her grief for her brother. My father is dead too. He passed last winter. She watched the news hit Aaron like a bullet. He actually swayed slightly, reaching out to steady himself against his horse. I am so sorry. Thomas loved your father deeply. Which means I am alone, Mr. Bennett, and you have traveled 1,000 miles for nothing. I am managing the ranch myself, and while I appreciate your concern and your promise to my brother, I must ask you to leave. I cannot afford to feed or house travelers, and I have work that needs doing. Aaron nodded slowly and put his hat back on his head. He gathered his horse's reins and prepared to mount, and Amelia felt a strange pang of regret. But she could not afford charity, and she certainly could not afford the complications that came with strange men appearing on her property. He had his foot in the stirrup when he stopped and turned back to her. Before I go, there is something I need to tell you, something Thomas said before he died. Mr. Bennett, I do not think I can bear to hear my brother's last words right now. This is not from his last moments. This is something he told me the night before the fight, when we were sitting watch together. Aaron's voice was steady now, stronger. He told me that his greatest fear was not dying in battle. His greatest fear was that you would end up alone and isolated, that you would be so determined to prove you could manage without help that you would refuse it even when it was freely offered. He said you had their mother's stubborn pride and their father's fierce independence, and that combination would either make you successful or destroy you. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes and hated herself for it. He had no right to judge my character. He had every right. He was your brother, and he loved you. Aaron took his foot out of the stirrup and walked to the fence line, stopping at the boundary of her property with careful respect. Thomas told me that night that if anything happened to him, if someone ever came to check on you, they should tell you something specific. He said I should tell you that the blackbirds always come back to the cottonwood tree. The rifle slipped from Amelia's hands and clattered on the porch. She gripped the railing to keep from falling. The blackbirds and the cottonwood tree. It was a story from their childhood, a private joke that only she and Thomas had shared. When they were children, a pair of blackbirds had nested in the old cottonwood tree by the creek every spring. Thomas had been fascinated by them, had insisted they were the same pair returning year after year. Amelia had been skeptical until their father confirmed it, explaining that many birds mated for life and returned to the same territory season after season. Thomas had made it their secret code for promises kept and family bonds that could not be broken. He had written it in his last letter home before he stopped writing. How could you possibly know that? Her voice was barely a whisper. Because Thomas told me. He said if I ever found you, if I ever needed to prove I was telling the truth about knowing him, I should say those words. He said you would understand. Amelia wiped her eyes roughly with the back of her hand. She looked at Aaron Bennett standing at her fence line, this man who had traveled more than 1,000 miles to keep a promise to a dead friend, and she made a decision that terrified her. Your horse needs water and rest. You look like you could use the same. There is a barn behind the house where you can stable him and a pump by the trough. When you are finished, come to the house. I will have food ready. Aaron's expression shifted from resignation to surprise to something that might have been gratitude. Thank you, Miss Foster. I will not impose on your hospitality longer than necessary. We will discuss what is necessary after you have eaten and rested. Right now you look like you might fall over if a strong wind came through." She watched him lead his horse toward the barn, moving with that same careful stiffness that spoke of weeks in the saddle. Then she went inside and tried to steady her shaking hands enough to prepare a meal. By the time Aaron knocked on her door an hour later, Amelia had managed to pull together a substantial dinner of salt pork, beans, fresh bread, and coffee. It was more than she usually ate alone, but she had been raised to feed guests properly, and despite her earlier dismissal, she found herself wanting to honor the connection he had to Thomas. Aaron had cleaned up at the pump, she noticed. His face was scrubbed clean of trail dust, revealing features that were younger than she had initially thought. He could not be more than 25 or 26, with gray eyes that held an old soul's weariness. He had combed his dark hair back from his face, and the exhaustion that lined his features could not quite hide the fact that he was handsome in a rough-hewn way. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the table. "Eat before the food gets cold." He did not need to be told twice. He ate with the focused intensity of someone who had been on short rations for too long, but he maintained his manners, chewing with his mouth closed and using his utensils properly. It reminded Amelia that whatever else Aaron Bennett might be, he had been raised with some degree of civilization. She let him eat in silence, sipping her own coffee and watching him with open curiosity. When he finally leaned back in his chair with a sigh of satisfaction, she spoke. "Tell me about my brother. Tell me about how you met and what he was like in those last months." Aaron's expression softened. "I met Thomas in March of 1880. I had been hired as a scout for the Army because I knew the territory, and I spoke enough Apache to be useful in negotiations. Thomas was part of a cavalry unit stationed at Fort Grant. He was young and eager and absolutely terrified, though he tried hard not to show it. That sounds like Thomas. He always wanted to be brave." "He was brave, Miss Foster, but he was also smart enough to be scared. The men who were not scared were the ones who got themselves and others killed." Aaron accepted the coffee she poured for him with a nod of thanks. "I took a liking to him immediately. He reminded me of my younger cousins back in Texas, full of questions and wonder despite the harsh conditions. He would ask me about tracking, about reading the land, about how to tell if water was safe to drink, or if a plant was poisonous. He soaked up knowledge like a sponge. He always did love learning. He wanted to be a teacher before the Army came through with their recruitment promises. He told me that. He also told me he enlisted because he thought the pay would help you and your father. He felt guilty about leaving, but he believed he was doing the right thing." Amelia's throat tightened. "We told him not to go. We told him we would manage, but Thomas was stubborn." "Foster family trait, I gather." There was the ghost of a smile on Aaron's face, and Amelia found herself almost smiling back. "Tell me what happened. Tell me how he died." The smile vanished. Aaron was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if the dark liquid held answers. There was a renegade band of Apache warriors who had left the reservation. They were led by a young man named Nate, who was angry about treaty violations and broken promises. The Army's position was that they needed to be brought back by force. A group of us were sent to track them and either convince them to return peacefully or engage them in combat. And you engaged them in combat. The situation escalated. I will not pretend to know who fired the first shot or who was more at fault. I was trying to negotiate when someone panicked and the shooting started. Aaron's hands tightened around his coffee cup. Thomas was hit in the first volley. He went down hard and I got to him as fast as I could. The bullet had struck him in the chest, and I knew immediately it was mortal. Amelia closed her eyes, imagining her baby brother bleeding out in the Arizona desert, far from home and family. Was he in pain? Not for long. I had morphine in my kit and I gave him enough to ease him. He was conscious and lucid for about 10 minutes. He told me about you, about the ranch, about the cottonwood tree and the blackbirds. He made me promise to check on you. And then he told me to tell you that he was sorry he would not be coming home, but that he loved you and your father more than anything in the world. The tears came then, hot and fast, and Amelia did not try to stop them. She had cried when the army letter arrived, had cried at her father's graveside when she realized both the men in her life were gone forever. But she had not cried like this, with someone who had actually known Thomas in his final days, someone who could confirm that her brother had been loved and remembered and had not died alone. Aaron said nothing. He did not offer platitudes or try to comfort her physically. He simply sat across from her and waited, his presence solid and patient, until the storm of grief passed. When Amelia finally wiped her eyes and looked up at him, she saw understanding in his face. "You have lost people too. My parents when I was 16. My older brother 2 years after that. I have 2 younger cousins I helped raise, but they are grown now with families of their own in Houston. I understand what it is to be alone, Miss Foster. Amelia. If you knew my brother well enough to make him promises, you can call me Amelia. Only if you call me Aaron." She nodded and stood to clear the dishes. Aaron stood as well and helped her without being asked, carrying plates to the wash basin and handling them with the care of someone accustomed to pulling his own weight. They worked in companionable silence for several minutes before Amelia spoke again. "You said you came here to make sure I was all right. You can see that I am surviving, if not thriving. What will you do now?" Aaron dried the last plate and set it on the shelf with deliberate care. "I was hoping you might let me stay for a few days and help with whatever work needs doing around the ranch. I am good with cattle, decent with carpentry, and I can handle most repairs. Consider it payment for the meal and a way to honor Thomas's memory. I already told you I cannot afford to pay hired help. I am not asking for pay. I am asking for the chance to keep my promise properly. Thomas wanted me to make sure you were provided for, and from what I can see, this ranch needs more work than one person can reasonably handle alone." Amelia wanted to refuse. She wanted to maintain her independence and prove to herself and everyone else that she needed no one. But she was also practical enough to recognize when pride was about to cost her more than she could afford. 3 days, she said finally. "You can stay 3 days and help with the most pressing repairs. After that, you need to move on. I will not have the neighbors gossiping about a strange man living on my property. 3 days is more than generous. Thank you, Amelia." The way he said her name, with genuine respect and warmth, made something flutter in her chest. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on practical matters. "There is a small room off the barn that my father built for temporary hands during roundup season. It has a cot and a stove. You can stay there. I expect you up and working by dawn." "I will be up before dawn. A man does not travel 1,000 miles just to sleep late." She showed him to the small room as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that took her breath away every single evening. Aaron stood in the doorway of his temporary quarters and looked out at the view with an expression of wonder. "I can see why Thomas missed this place. It is beautiful." "It is home," Amelia said simply. "Or it was. Now I am not entirely sure what it is. It is still home. Home does not stop being home just because the people who made it special are gone. Their memory stays in the land and the buildings and the sky." She left him there with those words hanging in the air between them, walking back to her empty house with a confusion of emotions churning in her chest. Aaron Bennett had appeared out of nowhere, carrying messages from her dead brother and offering help she desperately needed, but was afraid to accept. She did not know if he was a blessing or a complication, but she knew that 3 days was not very long to figure it out. She lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, thinking about the blackbirds and the cottonwood tree, about promises kept and journeys taken. Somewhere in the barn, a man who had traveled more than 1,000 miles was sleeping, and Amelia could not decide if that made her feel safer or more vulnerable than she had felt in months. Dawn came cold and clear, as it always did in the high country, and Amelia woke to the sound of someone already moving around outside. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, sturdy trousers and a cotton shirt that had belonged to her father, and braided her dark blonde hair back from her face. When she stepped outside, she found Aaron already at work repairing the gate to the main corral, which had been hanging crooked for 2 months. "You said dawn," he called out when he saw her. "I took you at your word." Most men would sleep late after such a journey. Most men did not promise Thomas Foster they would look after his sister. Aaron drove a nail home with 3 solid strikes. "Besides, I am used to early mornings. Scouts do not get to sleep in when they are tracking or being tracked." Amelia walked over to examine his work. The gate was already hanging properly, the boards replaced where they had rotted, the hinges oiled and moving smoothly. "You do good work." "My father was a carpenter before he turned to ranching. He made sure all his boys knew how to build and repair properly," said a man who could not fix what broke was not much of a man at all. "Your father sounds like he was a wise person." "He was, strict but fair, and he loved his family fiercely. I try to live up to his example, though I fall short more often than not." They worked together throughout the morning, Aaron following her lead as she showed him the various tasks that needed attention. There was a section of fence that needed mending, a water trough that had cracked over the winter, shingles on the barn roof that needed replacing. Aaron tackled each job with quiet competence, never complaining, never suggesting he knew better than her how things should be done. By midday, they were both hungry and tired. Amelia prepared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried apples, and they ate sitting on the porch steps, looking out at her herd of cattle grazing in the near pasture. "How many head do you run?" Aaron asked. "About 200, though I lost 30 over the winter. Wolves got some, cold took others. I did what I could, but one person can only cover so much ground. 200 is a respectable herd for this terrain. Are you planning to sell any this fall?" "I need to. I need the money to hire help for the winter and to buy supplies. But getting them to market is the problem. The drive to Durango is 3 days each way, and I cannot leave the ranch unattended that long." Aaron was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of bread. "What if you had someone to help you with the drive?" "I do not have anyone to help me." "That is the entire problem. I could help you." Amelia turned to look at him, searching his face for some sign of jest or ulterior motive. She found neither. "You said you would stay 3 days, not 3 months. A cattle drive would require you to stay through the fall at minimum." "I have nowhere else to be. My cousins are settled and do not need me. I have no permanent job waiting for me anywhere. I told you I traveled 1,000 miles to keep my promise to Thomas, and that promise was not just to show up and say hello. It was to make sure you were all right, that you were provided for and safe. How can I claim to have kept that promise if I walk away knowing you are struggling?" "You cannot stay here, Aaron. People will talk. They already think I am strange for not marrying or selling out. If word spreads that I have a man living on my property, my reputation will be destroyed. Then I will be your hired hand. We will make it official, put it in writing if you want. You will pay me a percentage of the cattle sale instead of wages up front. That way you have help without outlaying money you do not have, and I have legitimate employment. There is nothing improper about a ranch owner hiring help. The offer was tempting, dangerously so. Amelia knew she needed help, knew she could not manage a successful cattle drive alone, knew the ranch was slowly slipping away from her despite her best efforts. But accepting Aaron's offer meant trusting him, depending on him, and trust was something she had learned to ration carefully. Why would you do this? You do not know me. You owe me nothing. I owe Thomas, and maybe I am tired of drifting, tired of having no purpose beyond the next job or the next town. Maybe helping you gives me something I have not had in a long time. What is that? A reason to stay in one place. A reason to build something instead of just passing through. There was such naked honesty in his voice that Amelia felt her defenses crumbling. She stood up abruptly, brushing crumbs from her lap. I need to think about this. I need time to consider what is best for the ranch. Of course. Take all the time you need. I will be here working either way for the next 3 days. She left him there and walked down to the creek, following the path she and Thomas had worn smooth as children. The cottonwood tree was still there, ancient and gnarled, its leaves rustling in the mountain breeze. She sat beneath it and watched the water flow past, clear and cold from the snowmelt still feeding it from the high peaks. What would Thomas want her to do? What would her father advise if he were still here? She knew the answers even as she asked the questions. Thomas would want her to accept help from someone he had trusted. Her father would want her to be practical, to recognize when pride was about to cost her the ranch they had all worked so hard to build. But there was something else, something she was almost afraid to acknowledge. She liked Aaron Bennett. She liked his quiet competence, his respect for her independence, his willingness to work without expecting praise or special treatment. She liked the way he talked about Thomas with genuine affection, the way he had kept his promise despite the enormous cost in time and effort. She liked him, and that scared her more than anything else. When Amelia returned to the house 2 hours later, she found Aaron on the roof of the barn, replacing shingles with the same careful attention to detail he had shown all day. He saw her and climbed down, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. I want to be clear about something, she said without preamble. If you stay, this is a business arrangement. You work for me, you take orders from me, and you respect that this is my ranch and my decisions are final. I will not have you trying to take over or making choices without consulting me first. Understood completely. And if at any point I feel this arrangement is not working, you leave without argument. No drama, no hurt feelings, just a clean departure. Agreed. You will take 15% of whatever the cattle bring at market. That should be enough to see you through the winter if you decide to move on afterward, or to serve as a start if you decide to look for other work in the area. That is more than fair. Amelia took a deep breath. Then I accept your offer. You can stay through the fall and help with the cattle drive. We will reassess after that. The smile that broke across Aaron's face was like sunrise over the mountains, transforming his tired features into something warm and genuinely happy. You will not regret this, Amelia. I promise you that. Do not make promises you cannot keep, Aaron. Just do the work and let the results speak for themselves. Fair enough. They shook hands on it, and Amelia tried to ignore the way her pulse jumped at the contact, the way his calloused hand felt solid and warm around hers. This was business, she reminded herself. This was practical necessity, nothing more. But as she watched Aaron climb back up on the barn roof to finish the repairs before dark, she could not quite convince herself that was the whole truth. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Aaron proved to be as good as his word, working from before dawn until after dusk, tackling every job that needed doing with tireless energy. He repaired fences, mended tools, helped her move the cattle to better grazing, and even fixed the old windmill that had not turned in 3 years. He never complained, never shirked, never made her feel like she was anything less than the boss and owner of the ranch, but he also did not keep his distance emotionally. During meals, which they took together out of practicality, he told her stories about Thomas, about their time together in Arizona, about the jokes her brother had made and the dreams he had shared. Each story was a gift, a way of keeping Thomas alive in her memory, and Amelia treasured them even as they made her heart ache. Aaron also talked about his own life, about growing up in Texas, about learning to track and scout from an old Mexican vaquero who had worked on his father's ranch. He spoke about the loss of his parents and brother with a quiet dignity that matched her own grief, and she found herself sharing things she had not spoken about to anyone, about the loneliness of the past months, about the pressure from neighbors who wanted her to fail, about her fears that she was not strong enough or smart enough to make the ranch work. "You are stronger than you think," Aaron told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I have met a lot of people in my travels, and very few of them would have the courage to do what you are doing. Running a ranch alone is hard enough for a man. For a woman facing all the prejudice and doubt you face, it is remarkable. Or foolish. My neighbors seem to think it is foolish. Your neighbors are probably threatened by you. You make them question their assumptions about what women can and cannot do. That makes people uncomfortable." "Do I make you uncomfortable?" Aaron looked at her with those steady gray eyes that always seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "You make me want to be better than I am. I would not call that uncomfortable. I would call it inspiring." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and they sat in comfortable silence until the cold drove them inside to their separate quarters. 3 weeks passed, then 4, then 6. Summer began its slow fade toward autumn, the aspens on the mountainsides turning gold, the air gaining a crisp edge that promised winter was not far behind. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. The cattle were fat and healthy, the buildings were in better repair than they had been in years, and Amelia found herself sleeping better at night knowing someone capable was sharing the workload. But she also found herself watching Aaron more than she should, noticing the way his muscles moved under his shirt when he worked, the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face, the way he was unfailingly gentle with the animals and patient with her when she was short-tempered from exhaustion. She found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the sound of his voice and the warmth of his presence. It terrified her. She had not thought about romance or love in years. After her mother's death when she was 15, she had focused on helping her father run the ranch and taking care of Thomas. After Thomas left for the army, she had focused on supporting her aging father and learning everything she could about managing the property. There had been no time for courtship or flirtation, and she had convinced herself she did not want or need those things. But Aaron made her made her wonder what it would be like to have a partner instead of just a hired hand, someone to share not just the work, but also the life they were building. And that wanting felt like a betrayal of her hard-won independence. She was wrestling with these thoughts one morning in late September when riders appeared on the road to the ranch. Amelia recognized them immediately, and her stomach sank. Calvin Pritchard and his 2 sons, owners of the largest ranch in the valley and persistent thorns in her side since her father's death. Aaron noticed her tension and set down the bridle he had been mending. "Trouble, probably. Calvin has been trying to buy my land for months. He does not take no for an answer gracefully. Want me to stay close?" please." Calvin Pritchard was a large man in his mid-50s, with the florid face and commanding presence of someone used to getting his way. His sons, Marcus and Peter, were younger versions of their father, all swagger and entitlement. They reined in their horses at the fence line, and Calvin tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Miss Foster, I see you finally got smart and hired some help." "Mr. Pritchard." "What brings you out here?" "Just being neighborly, checking to see how you are managing. Heard in town you might be planning a cattle drive this fall. News travels fast. In a small community, everything travels fast." Calvin's eyes flicked to Aaron, assessment and dismissal in a single glance. "I also heard you hired some drifter nobody knows. That true?" "I hired a ranch hand with good references. His background is none of your concern." "It is my concern when strangers show up in our valley. We have had problems with rustlers and thieves. A man has to protect his interests." Aaron stepped forward, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard. "Aaron Bennett, sir. I am no rustler or thief. I am simply a man doing honest work for honest pay." "Bennett, that name means something to me." "I doubt it. I am from Texas originally. Been working as a scout and ranch hand throughout the territories for the past few years." Marcus Pritchard, the older son, spoke up with a sneer in his voice. "A scout? That means you were probably involved in killing Indians." "That the kind of man you want around, Miss Foster? Someone with blood on his hands." Amelia felt her temper flare. "I will thank you to keep your opinions about my employees to yourself, Marcus. Unless you have actual business to discuss, I suggest you move along. I have work to do." Calvin held up a placating hand. Now, no need to get hostile. I actually did come here with business in mind. I am prepared to offer you $3,000 for your land and cattle. That is more than fair, given the condition of the property." "My property is in excellent condition, and it is not for sale at any price. I have told you this repeatedly." "But how long can you keep it going, truly? Winter is coming, and winters are hard up here. You might have helped now, but what happens when this drifter moves on to the next job? You will be alone again, struggling, watching your investment crumble." "I will manage just fine. Or you could take my offer, set yourself up comfortably in town, maybe find a proper husband instead of playing at being a rancher. A pretty young woman like you should not be wasting her life on cattle and horses." The condescension in his voice made Amelia want to scream, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for your offer, Mr. Pritchard, but my answer remains no. Now, if you will excuse me, I have fences to check." Calvin's expression darkened. "You are making a mistake, Miss Foster. I am trying to help you, but my patience has limits. There may come a time when I am not feeling so generous." Aaron moved to stand beside Amelia, close enough that his presence was a clear statement of support. "I believe the lady has made her position clear. Perhaps it is time you gentlemen headed back to your own property." Peter Pritchard, the younger son, bristled. "You do not tell us what to do, drifter. This does not concern you. Miss Foster is my employer, and I am standing on her property. That makes it very much my concern." For a moment the tension was thick enough to cut, the Pritchard men weighing whether to push the confrontation further. But Calvin was smart enough to recognize he had lost this round. He gathered his reins and turned his horse with deliberate slowness. "We will be going. But think about what I said, Miss Foster. Winter is long and full of surprises. It would be a shame if something happened to make your situation even more difficult." They rode off at a leisurely pace, making it clear they were leaving on their own terms, not because they had been told to go. Amelia watched them until they were out of sight, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "That sounded like a threat," Aaron said quietly. "It was a threat. Calvin has been pressuring me since my father died." He wants my land because it has the best water rights in the valley, and he is not above using intimidation to get what he wants. Has he tried anything beyond words? Not yet, but I would not put it past him. Amelia turned to face Aaron, seeing the concern in his eyes. This is part of what I was warning you about. Staying here means dealing with men like Calvin Pritchard, means possibly putting yourself in danger. I have faced worse than entitled ranchers, Amelia. I am not going anywhere. The simple certainty in his voice made something warm bloom in her chest. Thank you for standing with me, always. That one word hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to address. Amelia turned away first, suddenly flustered. We should check those fences. If Calvin is making threats, I want to make sure he has not already sabotaged anything. They spent the rest of the day riding the fence line, checking for breaks or signs of tampering. They found nothing suspicious, but the encounter with the Pritchards had left Amelia on edge. She knew Calvin was not a man to cross lightly, and she worried about what he might do if he decided she was not going to sell willingly. That night, as they ate dinner, Aaron broached the subject again. Have you considered reporting Pritchard's threats to the sheriff? The sheriff is Calvin's cousin. He would not do anything even if I had proof, which I do not. It is my word against a powerful man's, and we both know how that ends. Then we need to be prepared for trouble. I am going to start sleeping in the barn loft instead of the shed. That way I am closer to the house if anything happens. Aaron, you do not have to. Yes, I do. I made a promise to keep you safe, and I take my promises seriously. Besides, the loft is warmer. Winter is coming, remember. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she did not need protecting, but the truth was she felt safer knowing Aaron would be nearby. All right, but be careful. If Calvin thinks there is something improper going on between us, he will use it as ammunition. Let him think what he wants. You and I know the truth, and that is all that matters. But what was the truth? Amelia lay in bed that night asking herself that question. Aaron had started as a stranger fulfilling a deathbed promise, had become a hired hand and business partner, and was now. What? A friend, certainly. A protector, clearly. But there was something more developing between them, something she could feel growing stronger every day despite her efforts to ignore it. She thought about the way he looked at her sometimes, with a warmth that went beyond mere friendship. She thought about the way her heart raced when he smiled at her, the way she found excuses to stand closer to him than necessary, the way his name on her lips felt natural and right. She was falling in love with Aaron Bennett, had perhaps been falling since the moment he mentioned the blackbirds and the cottonwood tree. And that realization was both thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. October arrived with the first hard frost, painting the world in silver and signaling it was time to prepare for the cattle drive. Amelia and Aaron spent days planning the route, calculating how long it would take, deciding which cattle to sell and which to keep for breeding stock. They worked with the easy coordination of people who had learned each other's rhythms and habits, anticipating needs and filling gaps without needing to discuss every detail. The night before they were scheduled to leave, Amelia could not sleep. She stood on her porch wrapped in a shawl against the cold, looking up at the brilliant display of stars overhead. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Aaron approaching, a blanket draped over his shoulders. Could not sleep either, he asked. Too much to think about. Too many things that could go wrong, or too many things that could go right. Aaron came to stand beside her at the railing. We have good cattle, a decent route, and fair weather predicted. We can do this, Amelia. Why do you have such faith in me? Because I have seen what you can do. I have watched you manage this ranch with skill and determination, despite every obstacle thrown in your way. I have seen your strength and your intelligence, and your refusal to give up even when it would be easier. How could I not have faith in you?" She turned to look at him, this man who had traveled 1,000 miles to keep a promise, who had stayed to help her when he could have walked away, who looked at her like she was capable of anything. "I am glad you came here, Aaron. I did not want to be at first, but I am now. You have given me more than just help with the ranch. You have given me hope that I can actually make this work. You could have made it work without me, but I am glad I can make it easier. It is more than easier, it is." She struggled to find the words, to express feelings she barely understood herself. "It is better. Everything is better with you here." Aaron's hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not move, he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Amelia, I need to tell you something. I need to be honest about why I really want to stay. I thought you wanted to keep your promise to Thomas." "That is true, but it is not the whole truth anymore. Somewhere between repairing fences and herding cattle and sitting on this porch talking until the stars came out, something changed for me. You changed me. You made me realize I was not just drifting because I had nowhere to go. I was drifting because I had not found a reason to stop, and then I found you." Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Aaron, what are you saying?" "I am saying I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the first moment you stood on this porch with that rifle and that fierce look on your face, refusing to be intimidated or pitied. Maybe it took longer. But I know what I feel now, and I cannot keep pretending it is just about keeping a promise to your brother. We barely know each other. It has only been a few months. I have known you long enough to know you are the strongest, smartest, most remarkable woman I have ever met. I have known you long enough to know I do not want to leave when the cattle are sold. I want to stay, to be your partner in truth, to build this ranch with you and share your life if you will have me." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of joy, of feelings held back for too long finally being allowed expression. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been trying not to, trying to keep it professional and distant, but I cannot anymore. I do not want to anymore." Aaron's other hand came up to cup her face, his touch reverent and careful. "Then let me court you properly. Let me prove to you that I am worthy of your trust and your heart. Let me show you that I am here for the long term, that this is not some passing fancy or convenience. You have already proven all of that just by being here, just by being who you are. Then may I kiss you, Amelia Foster? Because I have been wanting to do that for weeks now, and if I do not do it soon, I might lose my mind." She answered by rising on her toes and closing the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. Aaron's arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into his warmth, into the solid strength of him, into the promise of everything they could be together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Aaron rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably wait until we get back from the cattle drive to tell anyone about this. I do not want to give Pritchard or anyone else ammunition to use against you." "Agreed. But Aaron, when we get back, I do not want to hide what we feel. I am tired of living my life based on what other people think I should do. Then we will not hide. We will stand together and let the world think whatever it wants." They went to bed separately that night, propriety still demanding some concessions, but Amelia slept better than she had in months, wrapped in the knowledge that she was no longer alone, that someone saw her and loved her for exactly who she was. The cattle drive started smoothly. They set out with 150 head of prime beef, moving them at a steady pace toward the markets in Durango. The weather held cool but clear. and the cattle cooperated better than Amelia had dared hope. Aaron rode point while she managed the flanks, and they worked together with the seamless coordination they had developed over months of partnership. On the third day, as they were making camp for the night, they spotted riders approaching. Amelia's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle in her saddle scabbard, but Aaron touched her arm gently. "Wait, look at how they are approaching. That is not hostile." He was right. The three riders came in slowly, hands visible, making no threatening moves. As they got closer, Amelia saw they were Native Americans, 2 men and a woman, dressed in a mix of traditional and white man's clothing. The older of the 2 men raised his hand in greeting. "We mean no harm. We saw your herd and hoped we might trade." Aaron nudged his horse forward, addressing them in a language Amelia did not understand. The older man's face lit up with surprise and pleasure, and they conversed for several minutes in what sounded like Apache. Finally, Aaron turned back to Amelia. "They are Ute, passing through on their way to winter grounds. They have venison and they would like to trade for some beef. The hunting has been poor this season and they have children who need feeding." Amelia considered. She had cattle to spare and fresh venison would be welcome. But more than that, she knew what it was to be struggling and hungry. "Tell them I will trade 2 head of beef for whatever venison they can spare, and if they want coffee, I will share what I have." Aaron translated, and the relief on the visitors' faces was palpable. The trade was made quickly, and the Ute family accepted the coffee with grateful smiles. Before they left, the older man spoke again, and Aaron listened intently. "He says to be careful on the trail ahead. There are white men camped near the river crossing who gave him a bad feeling. He thinks they might be thieves or worse. He suggests we take the longer route around the bend even though it adds half a day." Amelia looked at the man, seeing the genuine concern in his weathered face. "Tell him thank you for the warning and that we will be careful. And tell him I hope his family has a good winter." Aaron translated, and the man nodded solemnly, then said something else that made Aaron smile. "He says you have a generous heart and your man is lucky to have found you." "My man." I may have mentioned that we were more than just business partners. Amelia felt her cheeks heat, but she did not deny it. The Ute family rode off into the gathering dusk, and Aaron looked at her with amusement dancing in his gray eyes. Should I have corrected him? No, you should not have. She nudged her horse closer to his. "We should set a watch tonight. If there are thieves on the trail, I want to be ready." They took turns standing guard that night, and the next day they followed the Ute man's advice and took the longer route around the river bend. It added time to their journey, but Amelia trusted the warning. When they finally reached Durango 5 days after leaving the ranch, both of them were exhausted but triumphant. The cattle sold for more than Amelia had hoped. The market was strong, the buyers were competitive, and by the time the last head was tallied and paid for, she had enough money to see the ranch through the winter with a comfortable margin for emergencies. She paid Aaron his 15% as agreed, though he tried to argue that he did not need so much. "A deal is a deal," she insisted, pressing the money into his hand. "You earned this, Aaron. You earned it with every fence post you mended and every hour you worked beside me. I would have done it for free, you know. For you, I know. But that does not mean you should have to." They stayed in Durango for 2 days to rest and resupply before the journey home. On their last evening in town, Aaron took Amelia to the nicest restaurant she had ever seen, a place with white tablecloths and crystal glasses and food that tasted like something from a dream. She had protested that she did not have proper clothes for such an establishment, but Aaron had insisted she looked beautiful in her simple dress, and the warmth in his eyes told her he meant it. "I want to ask you something," Aaron said over dessert. his expression suddenly serious. "And I want you to feel free to say no if it is too soon or if you are not ready." "What is it?" "When we get back to the ranch, I want to court you properly and openly. I want everyone in the valley to know that I am not just your hired hand, that I am the man who loves you and intends to marry you if you will have me." "Marry me?" "Aaron, we have only been together as a couple for a few weeks." "I know, and I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am asking for the chance to prove myself to you, to show you that what I feel is not going to change or fade. I am asking for your permission to build a future with you, however long that takes." Amelia reached across the table and took his hand. "Yes, I want that too. I want all of it, the courtship and the future and everything in between. You are right that it is fast, but sometimes the heart knows things the head is still figuring out. So when we get home, I can tell people you are my girl. You can tell people I am your girl. And I will tell them you are my man, and if they do not like it, they can take their opinions elsewhere." Aaron laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. "I love you, Amelia Foster. I love you too, Aaron Bennett." The ride back to the ranch was slower than the ride out, with just the two of them and the pack horses carrying supplies. They took their time, stopping to make camp early each night, sitting close by the fire and talking about their plans for the ranch, for the future, for the life they wanted to build together. On the last night before reaching home, Aaron pulled a small bundle from his saddlebag and handed it to Amelia. "I bought this for you in Durango. I was going to wait, but I cannot seem to stop myself." She unwrapped the bundle carefully and found a beautiful shawl inside, woven in shades of blue and green that reminded her of mountain lakes. It was finer than anything she owned, clearly expensive, and she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Aaron, this is too much." "Nothing is too much for you. I saw it in a shop window and all I could think was how beautiful you would look wearing it. Please, let me give you this." She stood and wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, and Aaron pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile and perfect. They stood like that for a long time, swaying slightly in the firelight, and Amelia thought about how much her life had changed since the day a dusty cowboy had appeared on her horizon. They reached the ranch just before sunset the next day, and everything looked exactly as they had left it. The cattle they had kept back were grazing peacefully, the buildings stood solid and secure, and the mountains rose in their eternal majesty against the darkening sky. But somehow it all looked different to Amelia now, more like a home than a burden, more like a beginning than an ending. "We did it," she said as they dismounted. "We actually did it. You did it. I just helped. We did it together. That matters, Aaron. That is the difference." They unloaded the supplies and tended the horses, falling into the familiar rhythm of shared work. When everything was put away, Aaron walked Amelia to her door, stopping on the porch where they had shared so many conversations, where he had first told her he loved her. "I should let you rest. It has been a long journey." "Stay," Amelia heard herself say. "Not to sleep here, not yet, but stay a while longer. I'm not ready for the day to end." So they sat on the porch steps, wrapped in the shawl he had bought her, watching the stars emerge one by one. And Amelia realized that for the first time since Thomas and her father had died, she was not just surviving. She was living. She was happy. She was loved. The news that Amelia Foster was being courted by her hired hand spread through the valley faster than wildfire. Within a week of their return, every ranch and homestead within 20 miles knew that Aaron Bennett was not just working for the Foster place. He was wooing the owner. The reactions ranged from scandalized disapproval to genuine happiness, with most opinions falling somewhere in between. Calvin Pritchard was predictably outraged. He appeared at the ranch 2 weeks after their return, his face red with indignation, demanding to speak with Amelia privately. "I will not be dismissed, Miss Foster. I have something to say and you will hear it." Amelia stood on her porch with Aaron beside her, refusing to be intimidated. "Say what you came to say, Mr. Pritchard. You are making a fool of yourself with this man. He is a drifter, a nobody, probably after your land and your money. I cannot stand by and watch you throw away your reputation and your future on someone so unsuitable. My reputation and my future are mine to manage, not yours. And Aaron is neither a drifter nor a nobody. He is a good man who has proven himself through hard work and honest dealing." Hard work. Honest dealing. He shows up out of nowhere with some story about your dead brother and you believe him. How do you even know he was really Thomas's friend? How do you know he is not a con man who heard about your situation and saw an opportunity? "Because I know," Amelia said firmly. "Because he knew things only Thomas could have told him. Because he has spent months working for nothing but a percentage of the cattle sale, with no guarantee I would make any money at all. Because I trust him, which is more than I can say about you." Calvin's expression turned ugly. "You are making a terrible mistake, and when this man breaks your heart or steals your property or abandons you, do not come crying to me for help. I would never come to you for help regardless of the circumstances. Now please leave my property." "Fine, but do not say I did not warn you." Calvin climbed on his horse and looked down at them with contempt. "You two deserve each other, a desperate woman and a fortune-hunting drifter. I hope you are both very happy in your poverty." He rode off at a gallop, his horse's hooves throwing up clods of dirt in a final gesture of disdain. Amelia felt her whole body trembling with anger and adrenaline, and Aaron's hand came to rest gently on her shoulder. "I am sorry you had to endure that." "I am not. Let Calvin think what he wants. Let everyone think what they want. I know the truth, and that is all that matters." But Calvin's words had planted a seed of doubt, not about Aaron's character, but about how their relationship might affect the ranch's standing in the community. If people believed Aaron was a fortune hunter, would they refuse to do business with her? Would the success she had fought so hard to achieve crumble because of prejudice and gossip? Aaron seemed to sense her thoughts. "If my presence here is causing problems, if it is making things harder for you, I can leave. I can find work elsewhere and court you from a distance. I do not want to be the reason you lose everything you have worked for." "No." Amelia turned to face him, gripping his arms fiercely. "No, you are not leaving. I am not letting small-minded people dictate my choices. We stay together, we build this ranch together, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." As it turned out, the community's reaction was more nuanced than Amelia had feared. Many of the women in Silverton, upon hearing the story of how Aaron had traveled 1,000 miles to keep a promise to a fallen friend, found it deeply romantic. They began to view him not as a fortune hunter, but as a devoted man of honor. Several of the older ranchers, men who had known and respected her father, visited the ranch to meet Aaron and judge him for themselves. They came away impressed by his knowledge, his work ethic, and his obvious devotion to both Amelia and the ranch. There were still those who disapproved, of course, particularly among Calvin Pritchard's allies and the more conservative families who believed women should not own property or make their own decisions. But their disapproval mattered less and less as the weeks passed, and Amelia and Aaron continued to thrive. Winter settled over the high country in earnest, bringing snow that buried the valley in white silence. The work on the ranch shifted to feeding livestock, maintaining shelters, and keeping paths clear between buildings. Aaron and Amelia developed a routine that suited them both, working side by side during the day and spending evenings by the fire, reading, talking, planning for the spring. On Christmas Eve, Aaron asked Amelia to bundle up and walk with him down to the cottonwood tree by the creek. The tree was bare now, its branches stark against the snow, but it was still beautiful in its own way. They stood beneath it, their breath misting in the cold air, and Aaron took both of her hands in his. "I have been thinking about what Thomas said, about the blackbirds always coming back to the cottonwood tree, about how some bonds cannot be broken, some promises always keep. And I realize that is what I want with you. I want a bond that cannot be broken. I want to make promises we will spend our whole lives keeping." He dropped to one knee in the snow, and Amelia's heart stopped. "Amelia Foster, I came here to honor a promise to your brother, but I am staying because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You have made me want to be better, work harder, dream bigger. You have given me a purpose and a home and a reason to believe in the future. I know it has only been a few months, and I know some people will say we are rushing, but I also know I do not want to spend another day without asking this question." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of your trust and your love? Will you be my wife and my partner, and the person I wake up next to every morning for as long as we both shall live?" Tears were streaming down Amelia's face, freezing on her cheeks, and she pulled Aaron to his feet, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I will marry you, Aaron Bennett." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her with a passion and tenderness that made her forget the cold, forget everything except the feeling of being loved and cherished and chosen. "How did you afford this?" she asked when they finally pulled apart. "You spent most of your money on supplies and repairs for the ranch." "I have been saving a little from every odd job I took over the past 2 years, money I never spent because I had no reason to spend it. I bought the ring in Durango while you were getting supplies. I have been carrying it around for weeks, trying to find the perfect moment to ask. This moment is perfect. This tree, this place where Thomas's memory lives on. I cannot think of anywhere better." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and that night Amelia invited Aaron to stay, not in the barn or the shed, but in her home, in her bed, in her life. They made love for the first time with the tenderness of people who knew they were creating something sacred and permanent. And Amelia felt like she was finally complete, like all the broken pieces of her heart had been lovingly gathered and mended. They were married in early spring, as soon as the mountain passes cleared enough for a circuit preacher to reach Silverton. The ceremony was small, held in the town's church with only a handful of guests. Most of the valley's ranching families attended, some out of genuine goodwill and others out of curiosity. Calvin Pritchard was notably absent, but Amelia hardly noticed. She wore a simple blue dress, the same color as the shawl Aaron had given her, and carried wildflowers that Aaron had picked that morning from the high meadows. Aaron wore his best suit, which he had purchased specially for the occasion, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears of joy. The preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, and the silence that followed was profound. Then he pronounced them husband and wife, and Aaron kissed Amelia with such happiness that the entire congregation burst into applause. The celebration afterward was simple but heartfelt, with food and music and dancing that lasted late into the evening. As Amelia danced with her new husband under the stars, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 1,000 miles traveled, a promise kept, a love discovered against all odds. "What are you thinking?" Aaron asked, holding her close. "I am thinking about how different my life is from what I expected it to be. How I thought I would have to do everything alone, that depending on anyone was weakness. And then you arrived and showed me that partnership is not weakness, it is strength multiplied. You saved me as much as I saved you. I was drifting, lost, going through the motions of living without any real purpose. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build instead of just survive. We saved each other. Then we are even, not even close. I still owe you every day for the rest of our lives, and I intend to pay that debt with interest." The first year of their marriage was challenging but rewarding. They worked the ranch together, making improvements and expanding the herd. Aaron proved to have excellent business sense, and under his and Amelia's combined management, the property began to prosper in ways it had not even when her father was alive. By the end of the summer, Amelia knew she was pregnant. She told Aaron on an evening much like the one when he had first told her he loved her, sitting on the porch watching the stars emerge. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, a mixture of joy and terror and fierce protectiveness that made her laugh and cry at the same time. "I am going to be a father," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "You are going to be an excellent father," Amelia assured him. "You have already proven you can keep promises and work hard and love fiercely. Those are the most important qualifications." Their son was born in the spring of 1884, during a late snowstorm that blanketed the valley in white. The labor was long and difficult, and Aaron paced outside the bedroom door like a caged animal until the midwife finally called him in to meet his child. He held the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and looked at Amelia with such love and gratitude that she felt her heart might burst. "What should we name him?" Aaron asked. "Thomas," Amelia said without hesitation. "Thomas Bennett, after my brother. So his memory lives on, so our son knows the story of the promise that brought his father to us." "Thomas," Aaron repeated, testing the name. "Little Thomas, I like it. I like it very much." Baby Thomas was a healthy, active child who grew quickly and seemed to have inherited the best qualities of both his parents. He had Aaron's gray eyes and Amelia's determined spirit, and from the moment he could walk, he followed his father around the ranch like a devoted shadow. 2 years later, they had a daughter, whom they named Margaret after Amelia's mother. She was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with dark blonde hair that curled around her face and a smile that could light up a room. Aaron was completely besotted with both his children, and Amelia often found him in the nursery at odd hours, simply watching them sleep with wonder on his face. The ranch continued to prosper. With Aaron's management and Amelia's inheritance from her father, they were able to purchase additional land and expand their operations. They hired several permanent hands, good men who respected Amelia's authority and Aaron's leadership. The cattle herd grew to over 500 head, and they began breeding horses as well, which proved to be extremely profitable. Calvin Pritchard made one final attempt to cause trouble, spreading rumors that Aaron had somehow tricked or coerced Amelia into marriage. But by that point, the community had seen too much evidence of their genuine partnership and affection to believe such nonsense. Calvin eventually gave up and focused on his own ranch, though he never stopped resenting the success of his former target. Over the years, Aaron and Amelia became pillars of the Silverton community. They helped neighbors in need, hosted gatherings at their ranch, and advocated for better schools and roads. Aaron served on the town council for several terms, and Amelia started a lending library that became a valued resource for the entire valley. On their 10th anniversary, They rode together to the cottonwood tree by the creek, leaving the children with a trusted hand for the afternoon. The tree had leafed out beautifully, its branches heavy with green, and as they sat beneath it, they heard a familiar sound: blackbirds. A pair of them had nested in the highest branches, and they sang their complex songs as if in celebration. Amelia and Aaron looked at each other and smiled, both thinking of Thomas and the promise that had brought them together. "He would be proud of us," Amelia said. "Thomas would be proud of the life we built, of the family we created. I like to think he knows somehow, that he can see what came from that promise I made to him." Aaron pulled Amelia close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I traveled 1,000 miles to find you, but I would have traveled 10,000 if necessary. You were worth every step, every hardship, every moment of doubt." "I almost sent you away," Amelia admitted. "That first day, I almost told you to leave immediately. If you had not mentioned the blackbirds and the cottonwood tree, if you had not found a way to prove you really knew Thomas, I would have lost the best thing that ever happened to me. But I did speak. I did prove it. And you took a chance on me, even though you were scared and had every reason to be cautious. That took courage, Amelia. You are the bravest person I know." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the birds and the creek and the wind in the leaves. The children would be waiting for them. Dinner would need to be prepared, and there were always chores that needed doing. But for this moment, they had time to simply be together, to appreciate the journey that had brought them from strangers to partners to husband and wife. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Amelia thought about how much had changed since that August day when she first saw a rider emerging from the dust. She had been alone then, struggling, convinced she had to do everything by herself or not at all. She had been so focused on surviving that she had forgotten what it meant to truly live. Aaron had changed all that. He had shown her that accepting help was not weakness but wisdom, that love was not a distraction from her goals but a catalyst for achieving them. He had traveled 1,000 miles to keep a promise, and in doing so, he had given her more than he had ever intended. He had given her partnership, love, family, and hope. "What are you thinking?" Aaron asked, tilting her chin up so he could see her face. "I am thinking about beginnings and promises and how the smallest moments can change everything. I am thinking about how grateful I am that you kept your word to Thomas, that you traveled so far, that you spoke when you could have just walked away. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you listened, that you gave me a chance, that you loved me despite all the reasons you had to guard your heart. We are quite a pair, are we not? Two people who were lost and alone, who found each other through grief and promise and stubbornness." "The best pair," Aaron agreed, kissing her softly. "The only pair I need." They rode back to the ranch as the stars began to appear, their horses moving easily over familiar ground. Smoke was rising from the chimney of their home, and they could see lamplight glowing in the windows. The children would be watching for them, eager for the small gifts they had promised to bring back. The hands would be finishing the evening chores, settling the animals for the night. Everything was exactly as it should be. As they dismounted and put away their horses, Amelia looked around at the life they had built together. The sturdy buildings, the healthy livestock, the well-tended land. But more than the physical success, she saw the love that infused every corner of the ranch. It was there in the careful repairs Aaron had made to her father's old rocking chair, in the flower garden she had planted by the porch, in the toys scattered around the yard where the children played. Thomas came running out to meet them, his 5-year-old legs pumping as fast as they could go. "Papa, Mama, did you see the blackbirds? Did they remember you?" Aaron scooped his son up and tossed him in the air, catching him with practiced ease. They remembered us. They always remember, just like I told you, and they will come back next year. Every year, for as long as we take care of their tree and their creek and their home. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her 3-year-old face serious and thoughtful. Mama, I helped make supper. I stirred the soup all by myself. I am very proud of you, sweetheart. Amelia hugged her daughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. Shall we all go inside and eat together? The family gathered around the table that Aaron had built during their first winter together, the same table where they had shared so many meals, so many conversations, so many plans. They held hands while Aaron said grace, thanking God for their blessings, their health, their home. After dinner, while Amelia put the children to bed, Aaron sat on the porch with his coffee, looking out at the darkening mountains. He thought about the long journey he had made from Texas, about the promise he had given to a dying friend, about the woman he had found at the end of that journey. He thought about how close he had come to giving up, to deciding that some promises were too hard to keep. But he had not given up. He had traveled every mile, faced every hardship, and when he arrived at this ranch, he had spoken the words that would change both their lives forever. The blackbirds always come back to the cottonwood tree. Such a simple phrase, but it had been the key that unlocked everything. Amelia came out and settled beside him, her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his with the ease of long habit. The children are asleep. Thomas wants you to tell him more stories about Uncle Thomas tomorrow. He is fascinated by the idea that he was named after a hero. Thomas Foster was a hero. He died trying to keep peace, trying to do what he believed was right. Our son should know about that legacy. And Margaret wants to know when she can help with the horses. She is determined to learn to ride properly. She is like her mother, that one, determined and brave and unwilling to accept limitations. She is like her father, too, kind and patient and willing to work hard for what she wants. They sat in comfortable silence, wrapped in the cool evening air and each other's warmth. In the distance, an owl hooted, and the cattle settled down for the night. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, and the stars began their slow wheel across the sky. "Aaron," Amelia said softly. "Yes, my love. Thank you for traveling 1,000 miles. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for not giving up, even when I tried to send you away. Thank you for listening when I spoke. Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with a wild story and nothing to offer but hard work and a faithful heart. You had everything to offer. You had exactly what I needed, even if I did not know it yet." Aaron turned to kiss her, and in that kiss was everything they had built together. The ranch, the children, the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. It was all there, all present, all real. Years continued to pass in the rhythm of seasons. Springs brought new calves and colts. Summers meant long days of work under the relentless sun. Autumns were for cattle drives and harvest, and winters were for rest and planning. Thomas and Margaret grew strong and capable, learning to ride and rope and read the land the way Aaron had learned from the old vaquero, and the way Amelia had learned from her father. When Thomas was 10 and Margaret was 8, they had another child, a son they named Daniel after Aaron's father. He was a surprise, unexpected but deeply welcomed, and he completed their family in a way none of them had anticipated. Daniel was quieter than his siblings, more introspective, with a gift for numbers that suggested he might be the one to handle the business side of the ranch when he grew up. The children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, how their father had traveled from Texas to Colorado to keep a promise, how their mother had almost sent him away until he spoke the secret words only her brother could have told him. They heard about the blackbirds and the cottonwood tree, about promises kept and love found, about the importance of honor and hard work, and never giving up on what mattered. As the children reached young adulthood and began to make their own choices about their futures, Amelia and Aaron watched with pride. Thomas decided to stay on the ranch, taking over more and more of the daily operations as his father's hair turned gray. Margaret married a kind rancher from the next valley over, someone who respected her intelligence and treated her as an equal partner. Daniel went to Denver to study business, with plans to return and help modernize the ranch's operations. Through it all, Aaron and Amelia remained the steadfast center, their love for each other deepening with each passing year. They had their disagreements, their frustrations, their moments of doubt and difficulty. But they always came back to each other, always remembered the promises they had made beneath the cottonwood tree, always found their way through to the other side. On their 25th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The property had grown significantly over the years, now encompassing nearly 2,000 acres and supporting a thriving cattle and horse operation. The original house had been expanded and improved, but the core of it remained the same. The porch where Aaron and Amelia had shared so many conversations still solid and welcoming. As the party wound down and the younger generation headed to bed, Aaron and Amelia found themselves alone on that familiar porch once again. They were older now, their hair streaked with silver, their faces marked by years of sun and wind and hard work. But when Aaron looked at Amelia, he still saw the fierce young woman who had stood on this same porch with a rifle, refusing to be intimidated or diminished. 25 years, Amelia said wonderingly. It seems like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean. Some days I feel like that dusty cowboy who rode up to your fence line is a completely different person. Other days it feels like it was yesterday. Do you have any regrets? Anything you would do differently if you could go back? Aaron considered the question seriously, as he always did when Amelia asked him something important. I would have ridden faster. I would have gotten here sooner, so I could have met your father, so you would have had more help during those difficult months after Thomas died. But other than that, no regrets at all. Every choice I made, every mile I traveled, every decision we made together, it all led us here. To this life, this family, this love. How could I regret any of that, even the hard times? The droughts and the harsh winters and the sleepless nights worrying about money and children, and whether we were doing everything right. Especially those times. The hard times tested us and proved that what we had was real and lasting. Easy times are pleasant, but they do not build character or strengthen bonds. It was the difficult moments that showed us who we really were, both individually and together. Amelia leaned into him, and they rocked gently in the familiar chair, the same one her father had built so many years ago. I used to be so afraid of depending on anyone. I thought it made me weak, made me vulnerable. And it did make me vulnerable, but not in the way I feared. It made me vulnerable to happiness, to love, to all the beautiful things I was protecting myself from by staying isolated. You were never isolated, not really. You had the memory of your family, the strength of your parents and brother living on in you. But you needed someone to help you see that you did not have to carry that legacy alone. And you needed someone to give you a reason to stop running. True. We were both running in our own ways. You were running toward independence and self-sufficiency. I was running away from grief and purposelessness. We met in the middle and realized we did not need to run anymore. They sat until the moon rose high and bright, silvering the valley below them. The cattle were quiet, the horses at rest, the children and grandchildren sleeping safely in their beds. Everything was peaceful, prosperous, perfect. Aaron, Amelia said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, my love. I am so glad you spoke. I am so glad you did not just ride away when I told you to go. I am so glad you found the words that made me listen, that made me take a chance, that made me see what we could be together. I am glad you listened. I am glad you were brave enough to trust again, to let someone in despite all your fears. That took more courage than anything I have ever done. We were brave together. That is what matters. We faced everything side by side, and that made all the difference. As the years continued to unfold, Aaron and Amelia gradually transitioned into the role of elders, passing more and more responsibility to their children while remaining active and engaged in the ranch's operation. They became grandparents multiple times over, and then great-grandparents, watching their family tree spread and flourish like the cottonwood by the creek. They made a point to visit that cottonwood tree at least once a year, on their anniversary, to listen for the blackbirds and remember the promise that had started everything. The tree grew older and more gnarled, but it remained strong, its roots reaching deep into the earth, its branches reaching high toward the sky. Like their love, it endured through seasons of plenty and seasons of hardship, a constant reminder that some things, once established, could not be easily shaken. When Aaron was 72 years old, he became ill with pneumonia, the same disease that had claimed Amelia's father. For a terrifying week, Amelia thought she might lose him, thought the universe might be cruel enough to take away the man she had spent nearly 40 years building a life with. She sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, refusing to let him slip away. "You promised me a lifetime," she told him fiercely. "You promised me every day until we were old and gray and had grandchildren running around our feet. Well, we have the grandchildren and we are definitely old and gray, but I am not ready for this to be over. Do you hear me, Aaron Bennett? I am not ready." Aaron opened his eyes, weak but clear, and smiled at her with all the love he had always shown. "I am not going anywhere. I traveled 1,000 miles to find you. Do you really think I am going to give up that easily? You had better not. I will be very angry with you if you do." "Cannot have that. An angry Amelia is a terrifying Amelia." He recovered slowly but surely, his constitution strengthened by years of outdoor work and clean living. When he was finally well enough to walk around again, his first request was to go to the cottonwood tree. Amelia bundled him up against the autumn chill, and they made their way down to the creek, moving slowly, leaning on each other for support in a different way than they had in their youth, but with no less need. The blackbirds were there, preparing for their migration south. They sang their complex songs, and Aaron and Amelia stood hand in hand, listening, remembering, grateful. "I thought I was going to lose you," Amelia admitted, tears running down her weathered cheeks. "I know. I thought so too for a while. But I kept thinking about you, about our family, about all the things we still have to do together, and I decided I was not finished yet. What do we still have to do? Live, love, watch our great-grandchildren grow, sit on our porch and count stars, hold your hand, kiss you good morning and good night, all the simple, ordinary, extraordinary things that make up a life together. That sounds perfect. It is perfect. You are perfect. This, what we have built, is perfect. Not without flaws or challenges, but perfect in its imperfection, in its realness, in its endurance." They returned to the house, where their family waited anxiously, and the celebration that erupted when they walked through the door together was joyous and loud and full of love. Aaron lived another 8 years after that scare. 8 years of continued joy and purpose and connection. He remained sharp and engaged until the very end, offering advice to his children and grandchildren, working in the garden Amelia had created, sitting on the porch and remembering the long, winding road that had brought him to this place. When he finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 80, Amelia grieved deeply, but without bitterness. She had been given 47 years with the man she loved, 47 years of partnership and passion and purpose. That was more than many people ever got, and she was grateful for every single day. She buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains he had loved and the valley where they had built their life. On his gravestone she had inscribed, "Aaron Bennett, beloved husband, father, grandfather, he traveled 1,000 miles and found home." Below that she added, "The blackbirds always come back to the cottonwood tree." Amelia lived for another 6 years after Aaron's death, surrounded by family, active in the community, still offering wisdom and guidance to anyone who asked. She walked to the cottonwood tree every week, sitting beneath its branches, talking to Aaron as if he were still there beside her. And in many ways he was. His presence was woven into every board of every building, every fence post he had mended, every tree he had planted, every child and grandchild he had loved. When she finally joined him, at the age of 84, the entire valley mourned. She was remembered not just as a successful rancher or a devoted wife and mother, but as a woman who had refused to let circumstance or society dictate her choices. She had been strong when she needed to be, vulnerable when it mattered, and wise enough to recognize when pride should be set aside in favor of partnership. She was buried next to Aaron, and on her gravestone, her children inscribed, "Amelia Foster Bennett, beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She listened when he spoke and found love. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, carefully stewarded by people who understood they were not just maintaining property, but preserving a legacy. The house was updated and modernized, but the porch remained, and family members still gathered there on summer evenings to watch the stars and tell stories about Aaron and Amelia, about the cowboy who traveled 1,000 miles and the woman who almost sent him away. The cottonwood tree by the creek grew ancient and enormous, and the blackbirds continued to return every spring, just as they had for decades. Children were brought there to hear the story, to understand where they came from, to learn about the power of promises kept and love honored. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, people swore they could see 2 figures sitting beneath that tree, holding hands, watching the water flow past, together still in all the ways that mattered. The story of Aaron and Amelia became part of the valley's folklore, told and retold, embellished and refined, but always maintaining its essential truth. A man made a promise to a dying friend and kept it despite the enormous cost. A woman took a chance on a stranger and found the partner she had not known she needed. Together, they built something that endured long after they were gone, a legacy of love and work and commitment that inspired everyone who heard it. Their great-great-grandchildren still visit the cottonwood tree, still listen for the blackbirds, still remember the story of how it all began. The ranch, now one of the most successful in Colorado, stands as a testament to what 2 people can accomplish when they choose partnership over isolation, trust over fear, love over practicality. And every spring, without fail, the blackbirds return to the cottonwood tree, building their nests, raising their young, singing their complex songs. They are a living reminder that some bonds cannot be broken, some promises transcend death, and some stories deserve to be told and retold until they become the very foundation upon which new lives are built. The love story of Aaron Bennett and Amelia Foster did not end when they died. It lived on in their children, their grandchildren, and all the generations that followed. It lived on in the ranch they had built together, in the trees they had planted, in the traditions they had established. It lived on in the land itself, in the mountains and the creek and the endless Colorado sky. Most of all, it lived on in the understanding that true love is not just about passion or romance, though those things matter. True love is about showing up, about keeping promises, about traveling however far is necessary to honor your commitments. It is about being brave enough to speak when silence would be easier, brave enough to listen when shutting your heart would be safer. It is about blackbirds returning to cottonwood trees, about bonds that cannot be broken, about two people finding each other against all odds and building a life that matters. And that story, that truth, would endure as long as people remembered to tell it, as long as the cottonwood tree stood by the creek, as long as the blackbirds continued their eternal return. Forever.